At 2:16 a.m., Pier 17 stopped breathing. The fog had come in low across the naval shipyard, turning crane lights into pale coins and cutting the black water into pieces behind the moored supply vessel. Maren Holt was halfway across the wet steel deck with two sealed ammunition cases dragging against her thighs when the Overwatch seal above the container lane folded sideways and hit the grating with a sound too heavy for the cold. "Stay back," someone shouted. The order was not meant for the team. It was meant for her. Maren stopped with one boot on a painted low marker and one hand still hooked through the case strap. Around her, men moved with clipped urgency, shoulders low, voices tight, their attention fixed on the fallen operator and the blind strip beyond the crane tower. But Maren was looking down. The deck plates under Pier 17 had gone still. Not quiet in the way machinery rests between cycles. Not quiet in the way fog swallows sound. Quiet in the way a pulse disappears when someone has put a finger over the vein. 11 seconds passed before the crane housing shuddered back to life. In that gap, beneath the dead machinery and the scrape of boots, Maren felt one thin vibration come up through the steel under her left heel, a low metallic tremor that did not belong to the pier, the vessel, or the lifting gear. Lieutenant Commander Alden Voss stepped out from beside the operations trailer with his coat buttoned clean and his face calm enough to look official. "Ammo detail stays behind the yellow line," he said. Maren lifted her eyes. "That line is sitting over the wrong load." A young petty officer turned on her, as if she had spoken in church. "You carry boxes, Holt. You do not call structure." The wounded SEAL was being pulled clear now, his rifle left against a coil of wet rope near the edge of the staging lane. Beyond him, the fog opened and closed around stacked containers marked for auxiliary transfer, each one dark, square, and heavier than its paperwork claimed. Voss did not look at the container row. He looked at Maren's ammunition cases, then at her temporary badge, then at the yellow line, as if rank alone could make steel honest. "Move her off the pier," he said. The crane lights flickered once. The deck gave another faint tremor under Maren's boot, shorter this time, almost hidden beneath the returning machinery. She looked at the rifle, then at the fallen SEAL, then at the container whose weight had been lying to everyone since midnight. Her voice stayed low enough that only the men closest to her heard it. "Give me the rifle." For half a second, nobody moved, because ammo runners were supposed to bring ammunition, not ask for the one thing everyone had suddenly become afraid to touch. No one handed her the rifle. Not at first. The request hung between the stacked containers and the wet rope like a thing that had no authorized place to land, and Maren could see the decision moving across their faces. The injured SEAL, the fog, the blind lane, the woman with an ammo badge and oil on her cuffs. 3 hours earlier, she had been invisible enough for all of them. At 11:08 p.m., Pier 17 was still running on schedule, the shipyard lights burning white over a skin of cold mist, the temperature holding at 38 degrees, the steel deck slick but not frozen. Maren had stood at the temporary load table with a clipboard she had not been issued, checking ammunition cases against movement sheet P17-44C, while a petty officer named Harlan recited serials too quickly and assumed she would simply nod. She did not nod. She marked a crate that came up 9 pounds light, then another whose seal had been replaced with a newer band. "Inventory clerk is inside," Harlan told her, not cruelly, just impatiently. "You only carry what we clear." Maren slid the sheet back toward him. "Then clear this twice." He stared at the mark beside the weight column, then looked over her shoulder as Lieutenant Commander Alden Voss approached from the operations trailer. Voss had the kind of neatness that made disorder look like a personal insult. His gloves were dry. His boots had no pier grit in the seams. Even in the damp cold, his collar sat flat and exact beneath his dark coat. "Is there a problem with my load table?" he asked. Harlan straightened. Maren did not. 2 case weights are off from the copy at staging. 1 seal is too new for a midnight movement. Voss took the sheet and gave it the quick glance of a man checking whether a lower-ranking person had made a spelling mistake. Replacement seals were authorized after inspection. The inspection block is blank. Voss looked at her temporary badge. "Miss Holt, this pier moves by authorization, not by suspicion." The words were polished enough to avoid sounding like an insult, which made them more effective. Behind him, 3 operators checked radios. 1 crane crewman argued over a headset, and a civilian contractor in a gray rain jacket watched the auxiliary container lane without pretending to be busy. Maren noticed him because he looked at the deck plates every time Crane 4 slowed. At 11:31 p.m., Crane 4 stopped for 7 seconds during a listed diagnostic cycle. The vibration died beneath everyone's boots, and when it returned, the rhythm came back clean. Lift motor, cable tension, pump housing, water slap against pier piles. Maren counted it once and let it go. At 12:04 a.m., the same crane stopped again for 11 seconds, but no diagnostic was listed on the public board. The deck did not return clean that time. A low tremor stayed underneath, faint and stubborn, as if something heavy had been set where the pier had not agreed to carry it. Maren turned her head toward the auxiliary lane. A sealed container marked 6,200 pounds sat beyond the yellow line, but the steel beneath it answered like something closer to 9. She wrote only one note beside the load number. Dead interval, unlisted. Across the table, Voss saw the movement of her pen and understood, long before anyone else did, that the ammo runner had started listening to the pier. At 12:18 a.m., Maren carried the marked sheet to the operations trailer instead of the ammunition tent. She did not hurry, because hurry made low-ranking people look emotional, and emotion was easy to dismiss. The trailer door was half open, leaking warm fluorescent light onto the damp metal steps, and inside Voss stood over the pier schedule with 2 contractors and a harbor engineer who had stopped arguing the moment Maren appeared. "You are outside your lane," Voss said before she crossed the threshold. Maren held up movement sheet P17-44C with 2 fingers, careful not to touch the stamped authorization block. The auxiliary container in lane 3 is listed at 6,200 pounds. The deck response does not match that number. One contractor looked at the engineer. The engineer looked at Voss. Voss looked only at Maren. Deck response. He repeated it gently, as if helping her hear how foolish it sounded. Maren placed the sheet on the narrow counter beside the crane schedule. Crane 4 had an unlisted shutdown at 12:04. 11 seconds. After it came back online, the vibration under lane 3 did not return to baseline. The harbor engineer frowned despite himself and glanced at the public board. There was no 12:04 stop. "That is why I came here." Voss closed one gloved hand over the corner of the sheet, not taking it, only controlling where it could go. "Miss Holt, crane telemetry has certified diagnostics. Pier structure has inspection crews. Ammunition detail has 2 responsibilities: move sealed cases and stay clear of restricted movement." Maren took in the trailer without appearing to search it. The printed shutdown card on the wall listed 211 to 212 as the only remaining crane pause. A maintenance binder lay open beneath a radio charger, its last entry signed at 2140. Beside it, a gray contractor badge rested face down, still wet around the edges. "Then call the inspection crew," she said. "Delay the lane 3 transfer until they check the load." Harlan had followed her to the steps and now stood outside with one hand on the rail, caught between irritation and doubt. "We delay that lane. The whole launch window moves," he said. "Fog bank shifts in by 2:30. Tide turns at 2:41. "The pier is already telling you something moved before the window," Maren answered. Voss smiled, but only with his mouth. "Piers do not tell people things. Bad loads do." That landed harder than she intended. One of the contractors looked down. Voss noticed. The room's temperature seemed to change, though the heater kept ticking at the same tired rhythm. He lifted the movement sheet, folded it once along the center crease, and handed it back to Maren like a receipt for a minor inconvenience. "Your concern is noted. You will return to ammunition staging, and you will not approach lane 3 again unless directed by a qualified officer." Maren looked at the fold he had put through the authorization block. It was clean, exact, and unnecessary. "Who qualified the container?" Voss paused. "I did." That was the first useful answer he had given her. Maren put the sheet into the inside pocket of her work jacket and left without another word. At 1:07 a.m., she checked the sealed cases again and found a replaced band still colder than the others, as if it had come from outside storage late. At 1:42, the civilian contractor in the gray rain jacket crossed behind lane 3 and keyed a side gate that was not on the movement path. At 2:05, the crane operator called a brief correction over the headset. then stopped speaking when Voss stepped into view. By 2:15, the SEAL team was already moving along the yellow line, trusting a schedule that had been made to look clean. Maren stood at the load table with 2 ammunition cases at her feet, feeling the Pier's rhythm through the soles of her boots, waiting for the shutdown that was supposed to last 1 minute and knowing, before the first machine went quiet, that the next 11 seconds would decide who was lying. The shutdown began at 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 3 seconds, 3 seconds earlier than the printed card allowed. Crane 4 lost its motor wind first, then the pump housing under the east rail went flat. Then the deck stopped carrying the layered tremor of a working pier. For most of the men on Pier 17, the change felt like a pause in bad weather. For Maren, it felt like a floor losing its memory. She counted without moving her lips. 1, 2, 3. The SEAL team had reached the container lane by then, 6 dark figures passing beneath the frost-white crane lights, moving through fog thick enough to turn 20 yards into a guess. The auxiliary container sat to their right, its side panels beaded with cold water, its listed weight still lying from a page in Maren's jacket pocket. At 5 seconds, the low tremor returned under lane 3, but the crane did not. That was wrong. A pier did not carry a private rhythm after its machinery went dead, unless something else was awake beneath the steel. At 7 seconds, the Overwatch SEAL shifted above the rope coil, raising one hand toward his headset as if a sound had cut through the channel. At 9 seconds, Voss stepped out from the trailer and looked not at the team, not at the container, but at the public schedule board, watching the lie survive. At 11 seconds, the crane came back hard enough to rattle rainwater from the handrails. The Overwatch SEAL folded sideways. He struck the grating beside the coil and did not rise. The team compressed instantly, 2 men pulling him clear, one turning toward the blind lane, another signaling for the movement to halt. Voss's voice cut across the pier speaker with official calm. Continue to checkpoint 2. Do not crowd the staging lane. Maren was already moving. Harlan caught her arm before she reached the yellow line, his grip more afraid than angry. Holt, stop. She looked at his hand until he released her. The rifle lay where the fallen man had dropped it, wet at the stock, half hidden by rope. Maren did not reach for it like a prize. She looked past it, through the fog, toward the container row. A faint metallic tapping came up through the deck now, irregular and narrow, 3 beats, then a gap, then 2 beats, all of it masked whenever the crane motor surged. It was not a weapon sound. It was not a radio sound. It was weight speaking through stressed steel. Give me the rifle, she said. Harlan stared at her. You certified on that platform? No, the answer made him flinch. Maren kept her eyes on lane 3. I'm certified on why that deck is moving. Another SEAL, broader through the shoulders and breathing hard from dragging his teammate clear, looked from Maren to the fog. What do you see? Nothing useful. She stepped closer to the rope coil. That is the problem. The pier is giving us the warning, not the view. Voss came down the steps fast now, his coat open, his polished control beginning to crack at the edges. Remove her from the line. No one moved quickly enough for him. The crane light flickered again, and beneath it the auxiliary container settled by a fraction, so small most eyes would have missed it. Maren felt the change in her knees. Get them off lane 3, she said. Now. The broad-shouldered SEAL made the decision before rank could stop him. He lifted the rifle and placed it into her hands, not because he trusted her completely, but because the steel under his boots had just answered her before any officer did. Maren accepted the rifle as if it were another sealed case, something heavy, accountable, and dangerous only when mishandled. She did not make a show of checking it, did not turn the moment into proof of some hidden legend, did not look at Voss for permission. The broad-shouldered SEAL pointed once toward the blind lane and said, Hold that corner. Maren moved 3 steps to the left, away from the painted load marker, because the deck there still carried the false tremor. The spot she chose sat on older steel, patched in a darker plate, with a handrail cold enough to burn through her glove. From there, she could see the fog break around the first row of containers and the narrow gap where the team had been ordered to pass. She lowered herself behind a stack of empty dunnage, steady but not theatrical, and let the rifle rest without chasing anything in the mist. Lane 3 clears now, she said. Harlan repeated it louder, this time into his headset, and the SEALs began pulling back from the container row in pairs, bringing their injured man with them. Voss's voice cut through again from the Pier speaker. Checkpoint 2 remains active. Continue movement. No one obeyed. That was the first crack in his authority, and everyone on the pier heard it more clearly than the crane. At 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 41 seconds, the auxiliary container made a small, settling sound. Not a crash, not an explosion, just a deep metal complaint that traveled under the deck and came up through Maren's shoulder where it touched the handrail. She counted the rhythm now. 3 low knocks, a pause, 2 shorter knocks, then the crane's surge swallowing the pattern. It matched neither pump housing nor lift motor. It matched weight shifting against a restraint that had been placed to look temporary. There's a locked mass under lane 3, she said. Not on the manifest. The broad-shouldered SEAL looked back from the extraction point. How far? Maren kept her cheek off the rifle and her eyes on the fog. Far enough if you keep moving. Not far enough if you argue. Harlan stared at the painted deck line, as if it had become a lie in a language he could suddenly read. The fallen SEAL was dragged behind a concrete bollard, breathing, conscious enough to grip another man's sleeve. Maren saw his eyes cut toward her, not grateful, not confused, simply measuring. Then the fog shifted. A figure in a gray rain jacket appeared near the side gate, too close to the auxiliary lane, one hand raised toward a small device clipped near his chest. Maren did not fire at him. She lifted the rifle just enough for the movement to become visible through the mist, and the man froze because he understood the message before any word crossed the pier. The broad-shouldered SEAL moved on him from the opposite angle and took him down to the grating without spectacle. No blood, no shout worth remembering. Just a contractor's cheek pressed to wet steel and a device sliding away from his hand. Voss came off the trailer steps then, faster than before. That man is cleared personnel, he snapped. Maren shifted her weight and felt the patched plate answer under her boots. The hidden tremor stopped the moment the device was kicked clear. Harlan heard it too. His face changed. Commander, he said slowly into the channel. Crane 4 shutdown log just disappeared from the board. Voss turned toward him with a look sharp enough to warn him silent. But Harlan was no longer looking at Voss. He was looking at Maren, at the rifle in her hands, and at the ammunition cases behind her that still carried the only paper trail Voss had not thought important enough to steal. Harlan did not wait for Voss to answer. He crossed to the load table with the stiff walk of a man who had just discovered that procedure could protect him from the officer standing behind him. Maren lowered the rifle and handed it back to the broad-shouldered SEAL without ceremony, muzzle down, hands open, done with it the moment the corner was held. The crisis had shifted now. It was no longer in the fog. It was in the paperwork. Keep lane 3 cold, she said. No crane movement, no side gate access. No one touches that container. Voss stepped between her and the operations trailer. You are not giving Pier orders. Maren looked past him to Harlan. Pull the service spool. Harlan hesitated only long enough for Voss to hear the disobedience forming. Then he moved. The crane shack sat 20 yards from the trailer, a square metal room with a scratched window and a printer bolted under the console. Every formal crane pause generated a paper strip for maintenance. Not because officers like paper, but because steel equipment broke in ways digital boards sometimes failed to admit. At 2:19 a.m., Harlan tore 3 strips from the spool and brought them back under his jacket to keep the mist off the ink. The first showed the listed diagnostic at 23:31, 7.4 seconds. The second showed an unlisted stop at 0:04, 11.1 seconds. The third showed the crisis shutdown at 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 3 seconds, 11.3 seconds, entered under manual override, not scheduled maintenance. Voss reached for the strips. Harlan pulled them back. These go to safety control, he said. The words made the contractor on the grating turn his face away from the light. Maren crouched beside the device that had slid from his hand, careful not to touch it. A small maintenance tag hung from the casing, stamped with a civilian service number and a Pier access window that ended at 1:30. The man had still been inside the restricted lane at 2:16. Who extended his access? The broad-shouldered SEAL asked. Voss's answer arrived too quickly. Emergency Inspection Authority. Maren stood and removed movement sheet P17-44C from the inside pocket of her work jacket. The fold through the authorization block was still sharp. Then the emergency inspection should appear on the load sheet. She placed it on an ammunition case where the pier light could catch the wet ink. Harlan read the line aloud, slower than he had read anything all night. Auxiliary container, lane 3, declared 6,200 pounds, temporary support equipment, authorized by Lieutenant Commander Alden Voss. The harbor engineer, who had finally come down from the trailer, stared at the container and then at the deck plates beneath it. That container is not 6,200. No, Maren said. It is sitting like 8,900, maybe more if the lower mass is fixed instead of loose. She did not make it sound mystical. She made it sound like math done through a floor. The engineer swallowed and opened the maintenance tablet on his forearm. Pier vibration monitor P17. He recorded a load shift at 0:04 and again at 2:16. His thumb stopped moving. The 0:04 entry has been flagged for deletion. Voss's calm cracked into something colder than anger. That monitor is advisory. It is not command evidence. Maren looked at the paper strips, the device tag, the load sheet, and the container Voss had tried to move through fog under a false weight. Then command should be relieved to have advisory evidence before the pier fails under official paperwork. No one laughed. No one needed to. The betrayal had stopped being an accusation and become a set of matching times, matching signatures, and one 11-second gap Voss could no longer fold out of sight. By 3:08 a.m., Pier 17 had been sealed under a safety hold that no one on the deck could quietly undo. The fog still pressed against the shipyard lights, but the movement lane was empty now, the auxiliary container fenced off by red cones, and the crane shack printer sat underguard with its paper spool removed. Voss was not arrested on the pier. That would have been too dramatic and too useful to him later. He was relieved of movement authority by a harbor safety officer whose voice stayed flat while he read the temporary order from a tablet. Restricted access suspended, authorization credentials locked, procurement communications preserved, contractor approvals frozen under case review P17. SR 661. Voss accepted the words with the stiffness of a man already planning the version of events he would tell in a cleaner room. The cleaner room came at 5:40 a.m., inside a windowless review office behind the shipyard administration building, where wet coats hung from chair backs and coffee went cold beside evidence sleeves. Maren Holt sat at the end of the table in the same work jacket, her temporary ammunition badge still clipped crookedly to her chest. Harlan sat 2 chairs away, with the crane strips sealed in clear plastic. The harbor engineer presented the vibration data first, not as drama, but as a sequence. 23:31 diagnostic stop, 7.4 seconds, normal decay. 0:04 unlisted dead interval, 11.1 seconds. Abnormal residual vibration under lane 3, 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 3 seconds manual override, 11.3 seconds. Second abnormal load response. The frequency band was low, between 28 and 34 Hz, too broad to identify as a single machine and too narrow to blame on tide slap or wind through the crane frame. Then came the load sheet. Declared weight, 6,200 pounds. Estimated structural response, 8,900 to 9,200 pounds. Authorized by Lieutenant Commander Alden Voss. Access extension for civilian technician. Missing from the printed log, present only as a deleted digital flag. The procurement officer added the part Voss had been trying to protect. The auxiliary container belonged to a contractor package tied to a private maritime logistics consultancy, and Voss's post-service advisory review depended on that package clearing Pier 17 without a reportable safety failure. Voss listened with his hands folded. All of this is interpretive, he said. An ammunition assistant made a guess during an unstable incident. The safety officer turned one page. Miss Holt did not submit the vibration estimate. He looked toward the engineer. I did, the engineer said. After she told us where to measure. Voss shifted almost nothing but enough. Then she interfered with restricted operations based on training she has not disclosed. The review officer at the head of the table finally opened the sealed personnel query that had arrived from a classified administrative channel at 5:27. It did not contain medals, photographs, or a grand title. It contained 3 lines and a clearance code. Maren Holt, prior attachment, crown rivet. Specialty, structural anomaly recognition in maritime facilities. Status, detached, limited disclosure. The room did not change shape around those words. But Harlan stopped looking at her badge. The broad-shouldered SEAL, standing near the rear wall, with one sleeve damp from the pier, looked at the table instead, as if respect was something that should not make noise. Maren said nothing because the file had already said enough, and still not much at all. The review officer closed it. Lieutenant Commander Voss, this is now a procurement integrity matter and a command safety matter. Your movement authority remains suspended pending legal review. Voss tried one last clean angle. She requested a rifle outside her role. Maren looked up then. After your authorized lane, put a man down, and your unlisted shutdown hid the load that did it. The sentence was quiet, but left no space for polish. For the first time that morning, Voss had no document ready to stand between himself and the truth. At 7:12 a.m., Pier 17 looked ordinary again from a distance. The fog had lifted just enough to show the gray line of the harbor, the wet crane rails, and the auxiliary container sitting behind a hard safety perimeter with its false weight still printed on a tag that no one trusted anymore. The injured SEAL had been moved to medical evaluation, awake, angry at the interruption to his work, and alive. The team did not gather around Maren. They did not turn the pier into a ceremony. They went back through their equipment, their routes, and their signatures with a care that looked almost uncomfortable because it had arrived too late. Inside the administration building, the review officer finished the first controlled report at 7:26. Lieutenant Commander Alden Voss was removed from Pier Movement Authority, his access credentials locked, his procurement communications preserved, and his contractor approvals transferred to legal review under Case P17 SR 661. The draft advisory review tied to his post-service logistics position was frozen with the rest of the contractor file. No one needed to accuse him of ambition. The timestamps made the ambition visible enough. The civilian technician's device, the crane paper strips, the deleted shutdown flag, and the sealed movement sheet were cataloged in separate custody sleeves. No single piece looked dramatic. Together, they made Voss unnecessary to the truth. At 8:03, a maintenance crew weighed the auxiliary container under supervision and logged the verified mass at 9,140 pounds, far outside the declared 6,200. At 8:17, the harbor engineer added one sentence to the structural file. Residual vibration during two 11-second shutdown intervals indicated unauthorized load stress beneath lane 3. He stared at the words for a long moment before saving them, because they were not elegant, but they were correct. Maren signed nothing beyond her original ammunition transfer sheet. When a review officer asked whether she wanted her crown rivet attachment included in the operational summary, she shook her head once. "It is not needed for the correction," she said. That was all. The final public line changed at 9:02. Original cause: personnel movement disruption during crane restart. Amended cause: unauthorized structural load and falsified pier shutdown sequence. Voss's name stayed in the restricted annex. Maren's did not appear in the version anyone outside the review chain would read. Near the load table, Harlan found the fold Voss had made through P17-44C and flattened it with the heel of his hand before placing the sheet into a new clear sleeve. He did not apologize to Maren in front of the others. Instead, when a younger sailor tried to rush a weight check, Harlan stopped him and said, "Clear it twice." Maren heard it from the open doorway of the ammunition tent and kept walking. By noon, a transport truck waited at the service road with its engine idling low. She climbed in carrying no rifle, no award packet, and no story suitable for public telling. Behind her, Crane 4 restarted under a supervised cycle. The pier vibrated cleanly this time. Motor, pump, cable, water, steel. No missing pulse. No heathen tremor. And when the machinery paused for its scheduled test, every man on Pier 17 counted the seconds. If quiet discipline means more to you than loud glory, please like and subscribe. This story is a fictional military narrative created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental.